Hello and welcome to Sip and Tea with Sherry, where I hope to foster connections, community, and meaningful conversations. I invite you to grab a cup of tea or whatever hot drink you prefer and enjoy listening in on our conversation today. Welcome, Renita Petersheim, to my podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Renita is my aunt, married to my mom's brother, and she has done a fair bit of speaking over the years here and there at different events and stuff. And I'm glad to have her here to talk a little bit about women's sexuality is what we're going to focus on today. Thanks for coming and for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm so glad and excited to be on this.
I'm still very new at this whole podcast thing and getting used to all this stuff, but I really wanted to talk about this subject, particularly through Renita. I've heard her speak at the Restore conference a couple years ago, and that was really good to hear. It made me really think about this topic a little bit more and want to talk about it on my podcast. So that's a little bit about why I wanted to have her come and be on here. So, Renita, I would like you to tell us about some of your story, particularly regarding your understanding of sexuality as a woman, especially in our conservative Anabaptist circles that we are both a part of.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's good to be here. And yeah, I've told my story in like little parts when I talk about sexuality, and maybe it'll be kind of interesting what I include in my story to you, but I think it all like adds up to kind of like, I guess we all live in the perfect storm of creating things that go on in our lives. And so I was born in the state of Oregon. My mom was from non-Mennonite, non-Christian background, and my dad moved to Oregon at 16 years old. His parents were missionaries in Minnesota. And so I feel like some of that is even outside of the norm for like Pennsylvania background, even Mennonite background. I've always kind of seen myself as maybe like a little unique and outside the box. And so then we went up into Ontario, Canada for 5 years. So till I was 10, I lived up in Ontario for 5 of those years. So then we came back to the church where my parents had me, like that church that they were going to. And over the next 8 years, I saw a lot of my friends leave. And so it's interesting now, like hearing things, people talk about third culture kids and a lack of belonging. And I definitely have that stuff. So like I would have actually grown up in a lot of different cultures. Then at 18, I moved to Pennsylvania and like another whole culture. And some people are like, oh, if you were Mennonite in Oregon, this is normal, but it was very different. I met your uncle and you weren't around yet. So I came here to teach school. And so then this became my home place. And now I've lived here the longest I've lived anywhere. So I've lived here 28 years, pretty long. As for my story of sexuality, I was sexually violated between the ages of 4 to 6. That was a time of a lot of confusion for me. I did not understand. And I think also my parents didn't. They were like, here's the 6-year-old child. If you look at a picture of yourself when you're 6 and think, how much did I understand about my sexuality? Probably nothing. And so I think my parents, they were trying to care for me and help me. Thankfully, they found out about it when I was 6, but they didn't know how to help me through it. And they didn't even know how much I thought about it. Even at 6, 7, 8, I was thinking about it a lot because I didn't know how to understand what had happened. So a couple things happened because of that. For one thing, there became this thing of like somebody noticing me and that stood out to me, and then I was delighted in, and that's what I was really wanting. When I would look around and see people, I would want them to notice me. And it wasn't really in my mind connected to sexual, but I wanted to be noticed and delighted in. So that kind of became a fantasy for me. Like if I could catch someone's eye and get that feeling of delight from them, that was a big thing for me as a child. And then also just a sexual arousal and awareness that I had no idea what box to put it in. Like I'd never heard anybody talk about it. But then what happened, which may have actually added to more of the lies that I believed than even regarding sexuality, was my parents, when they found out about it, were like, we want to protect you, and kind of isolated me actually from a lot of people. I had 4 brothers, a lot of boy cousins, a lot of friends in the church that were boys. And so it was like, to keep you safe, you stay with us. And so sometimes it ended up being a lot of alone time. A lot of my early memories were, the sexual violation, but then a lot of playing by myself. What happened then was I had a lot of fantasy. I lived in a fantasy world, but I linked the aloneness with the sexual arousal. So aloneness, anxiety, stress, isolation, those were all linked with sexual arousals. That was kind of the negative part of my younger childhood. That was about till age 6. And all these things I didn't understand at the time, right? I'm only slowly finding these things out as I get older and continue to process and hear other people's stories. Then, I grew older in Oregon there. We moved back when I was 10. I played with my boy cousins a lot after I was older. And I never was left out. Like, we played football, climbed trees, jumped in manure piles. I drove combine for 2 summers in the grass seed harvest out there. So I just felt like a regular human being. Didn't see myself as different until I came to Pennsylvania. Those were harder years. It was a lot of fun. I found a lot of friends, a lot of girlfriends that I had not had when I was younger. But I also began to see the difference between girls and me, and just looking at like what they liked. I didn't have enough shoes to fit in. I didn't like shopping very much. I didn't love to cook. And so even as I got married and I was like, I don't even know quite how to talk with these friends, I just felt odd. So mixed into that time was I began to read a lot of marriage books because I was dating. I was really wanting to get married, and also I read some dating books, but a lot of marriage books. And I continued to after I was married. So I thought I was going to get a lot of help there, but what I found was a lot of stereotypes. And I was like, what do I do with these stereotypes? I didn't really fit in stereotypes before. And so what I picked up from these is like, I'm going to be loving a particular sort of person that's a man, and this is how all men are. So that's kind of what I came into marriage as. Not that I was going to love Daryl, which I could have learned from him. It was how to love a man. And now I, as a woman, this is how I am. And I think the biggest area that I was like unsure about was the whole sexual desire. I knew I had a lot of sexual desire, and I felt like that was normal. And I think I got that from my parents. Talked about it with us kids, not graphic, but just that this was a good thing. And so I didn't get any of that from them. But as I read the books, I'm like, oh, so this is basically like a husband's desire, and the woman just kind of has to do it. You know, and so I didn't really know what to do with those books. Then when we got married, I didn't know what to do with what happened then, because I was realizing that I had equal desire to him or more desire. And so then I'm like, well, what's going on? I always read that the husband's gonna have a lot of desire. What's going on, you know? And so I had 2 options. One was that he was having an affair, that he was looking at porn or, you know, masturbating, or that something was wrong with him. And then the other option was maybe I was ugly, I was unwanted in the relationship, or something was wrong with me. And those were my 2 options, like according to the books. Those were the 2 options I had. And I think there was also, you know, some people are like, why did you believe it? Why didn't you be like, well, that's not my experience? I don't know why. It's like all the books are right? Yeah. Or I don't know, somebody just recently said like, why did you absorb all that so easily? And I don't know why, other than I was very insecure about who I was. I had a lot of shame around my sexuality because I had linked this isolation with the arousal, and I'd started masturbating. And so I didn't really know what to do with that. Whenever I would talk about it, you know, maybe a higher desire, which I said very tentatively, people would say, oh, that's from your abuse. Like, if you get over that, you'll stop having the desire. And I'm like, do I want to lose my desire? You know what? Is that really like it's a bad thing? And when you're first married and you're with a group of couples, there's a lot of jokes that go on, and all the jokes would line up with the stereotypes as well. Like, oh, you know what he's gonna want when you get home, and I'm like, what's going on here? You know, all the jokes and our friends must be dealing with all the same stereotypes as the books, like what's happening to us, and so all these things going on. And then also a lot of the marriage books were like, you know, don't damage your husband's fragile ego. So then I was like, well, I shouldn't bring this up then, and like compliment him even when he's not doing well. So I'm like, I'm such a happy wife, you know? And I didn't really know how to talk through conflict. Some of the books framed conflict as disrespect to my husband. So I'm like, I can't even get into this subject that's actually is causing me a lot of stress, and didn't really know what to do with all of this stuff. So that was my framework. Like, and I didn't really know what to do. About 12 years ago, it sounds terrible because I lived in this for years.
Mm-hmm.
About 12 years ago, I was talking to a friend and she said, what if the books have it wrong and you actually are the happier woman here?
Mm-hmm.
What if what you have is actually good? Wouldn't that be great? Like, why can't you just run with what you have and be happy with that? And so I kind of actually set aside the books and I was like, I think I have a marriage that's actually working well,
Mm-hmm.
and all the sexual desires actually working pretty well. What if this is normal, actually? What if this is healthy? So I've been on a journey since then,
Mm-hmm.
but it's felt like a good spot to find
Mm-hmm.
myself. Yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit of where it got me to start searching. One thing you said is about talking about sexuality, like how I understand that as a woman. And yeah, that's kind of a whole complicated thing that like I definitely view it differently than some people. So I can talk about that a little bit also, but I don't know.
One thing is that I feel like with men's and women's stereotype, for a while I was just like, well, I kind of couldn't quite understand like how it could be like harmful, like stereotypes. As more like, I'm like, well, aren't a lot of men like that and aren't a lot of women like that? But I think as like the more stories that I've heard from people, I'm like, oh, so that's how that can be like damaging and stuff. And in some ways, I feel like I am more stereotypical of like the woman and like enjoying just like housework and like keeping up a home and stuff like that. But then in other ways, I began to realize that I'm like, oh, well, like in a lot of these ways, I'm not, oh, the woman is emotional and the man is not. I'm like, well, for most of my life, I'm not like the most emotional woman out there. So yeah, I think that I began to see like how that can be harmful. And the thing of a couple years ago, I had started just like reading a bunch of different marriage books and stuff because of having like different conversations around this. And I kind of was a little bit confused for a while because I'm just like, these books seem like what's wrong with the books and then like something. But I think that one of the main things I took away from that was just, it's not so much of like you were saying, getting to know a man, like this is how men are, this is how women are. It's like, no, this is a marriage. This is two individuals. Like you get to know your spouse and their needs and who they are as a person, and they get to know you and your needs and your desires. I'm not married yet, but trying to think of it more as like, well, it's not just getting to know a woman and a man. This is an individual, and this is how our individual marriage is going to work, and not needing to be like, oh, this is the marriage book that tells us how to be married. We can learn some of that ourselves because we're married to each other. The other thing was that growing up, I felt like in my later teenage years, felt that I grew up in a church culture that was much more like open and honest about sexuality than, let's say, the broader Mennonite culture is like, oh, this is just the facts of life and it's not something to be ashamed of and different stuff. So I kind of felt like, oh, this was like pretty good. And in some ways, I still feel like I know that that is a positive thing. But in more recent years, I began to see more of the lack around women and their desires and stuff because, looking back, I feel like, oh, the conversations are more about the man and his desire. And I think it was just assumed that women wouldn't struggle with anything of that type of nature, pornography or other types of sexual exploration, that over my high school years and stuff, I didn't struggle with stuff like that. But also looking back, if I would have anybody even known, or would have anybody even asked me how I was doing? I can't think of anybody asking me ever about my own sexual desires. And then also I feel like in the more recent years, I did start to realize, oh, I do have sexual desires and I do want to get married one day and have that experience, and acknowledging that and being like, oh, yeah, I do have this. And then thinking about how it didn't feel like there was as much of a safe space for women to be like, hey, I'm struggling with this. And I did hear about someone who had grown up in my church who was like, came out and was like, I have this sin that I'm struggling with, and was kind of met with, well, you're a woman and women don't struggle with these things. So I feel like I've had kind of different feelings and experiences and kind of different spectrums, and realized some of like the lack in my understanding of sexuality, particularly for women.
Well, and I feel like I agree with you that church has been becoming a safer space to talk about it. What I think is happening is that our confessions or our struggles kind of still have to fit into the narrative. So we're used to hearing guys say they're struggling with lust. So, oh, that fits the narrative. You know, if a woman feels lonely or forgotten, oh, that fits the narrative, you know, so that's okay. So whenever you switch the narrative, And a person that's almost too honest for us.
Mm-hmm.
So like hearing a guy say like he's lonely, he doesn't know what to do, but it doesn't include sexual lust.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, what do we do with a guy who's
Mhm.
lonely? Like, what do we do
Mhm.
with a guy that's emotional? Or then once again, the other side, like if a girl says, yeah, I'm struggling, I'm looking at porn. I've been in some small groups that were supposed to be a safe space, and maybe the topic was sexuality. And so the leader started out with, yeah, like porn's such a problem. And like, I could not believe in the last few years, I've been hearing that women, what in the world? Why do women struggle with porn? And I'm like, you know what? Nobody's going to confess today
Mm-hmm.
because they were framed as like almost unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
So like some sins are the men's sins, some sins are the women's sins, and it fits this narrative. And so we've become comfortable with confessing some things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you start thinking about the uncommon things to be confessing, those are the things that are usually shrouded in shame then.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a woman's sexual sin or struggle, even something like same-sex attraction. I mean, that's a super hard thing to confess and say I'm struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing, we don't know what to do with those people. Do they go to the women's accountability group then? I mean, where is a women's accountability group? Or do they go to the men's accountability group? There's just when a person confesses something outside of the narrative that we believe, it just shakes us up as a church. So yeah, I was thinking of, some of what you said about fitting the narrative and where that gets us. And I think that when even the books talk about men that lust and men begin to confess lust because it was like, oh, all men lust. This is actually like some of the teaching out there, all men lust. So if you have a man that says, I don't struggle with lust, that's actually super hard for men to confess because most men that say something like that are like, well, you're not a normal man. You're not allowed to talk anymore now about men-women relationships. You're not allowed to talk about modesty. You're not allowed to talk about anything because you don't really understand men because you don't lust. So that's a hard thing for men to say. But I think that the sad thing to me about the whole conversation that all men lust is that I think we actually leave them unhealed. Because what I've experienced is when I would hear them talking about men and their struggles, I'm like, wait, I fit into that category. Okay, so if I fit into that category, then I guess I could just keep lusting. Almost this kind of idea like, oh, I need to stop, but like this is normal. But realizing that I needed some healing for things that I was desiring that like, yeah, good sexual desire, but there was all this other stuff linked with anxiety and stress and masturbation that didn't get just perfectly healed when I got married. So I still need to work on healing, but I still want to keep my sexual desire. So what about men? Right? So instead of just saying, oh, well, all men lust, no, they actually need to figure out how to have pure desires, but good sexual desires. And they can keep that. They don't pray to have that go away. So I don't know. I just really feel like sometimes we leave men unhealed because of that. And then also on the other side, women don't get healing if they're struggling with these things unless they jump over into like the men's camp, end quote. Yeah.
So given some of those stereotypes and who is affected when women's sexual needs and desires are not addressed, and why does it matter? And who is harmed by the lack in the understanding of the sexual desires?
Well, I came up with a list of 7, the perfect number. No, I actually had 6 today, and I started thinking about it. There could be many more. But I have had people tell me like, well, that's your story. And, stereotypes are still helpful. It just means most men, most women. I'm like, I'm okay with that. I used to be really upset with it because of the trouble that I experienced and just like struggling with my identity. And probably nowadays, I mean, if what I struggled with back then would be now, and I wouldn't be in the church I'm in and the community I'm in, I would definitely say like, oh yeah, I struggled with transgender stuff or gender identity issues because of where I found myself. But yeah, so the first person is what I found myself as. And that's a woman with high desire. They almost feel like a unicorn. Like, where do I fit? Like, who am I? Like, is there anybody else like me? And then the way that hurts their marriage and themselves is they end up assuming things about themselves and their husband. Like, I called a counseling center, like, please help my husband. Like, what's wrong with him? Like, he must be hiding something from me. And, a lot of those were private struggles, even from my husband, because I didn't want to hurt him, thinking something was wrong. So women who have high desire, it hurts them. Women who have low desire, but wish it was higher, there's no good information out there. But then there's women with low desire that think it's normal and are actually totally content. The sad thing for them that I feel is that often low sexual desire is tied to low overall well-being. So if you have, if there's some depression, if there is low desire for life, just life itself, you're not going to have high sexual desire. I always think of sexuality, it's tied to us being alive. Alive with our body, alive with life, purpose, joy. And so if we connect that with sex, and then when we don't have it, think of our overall life. And so I feel like, vitamin deficiencies, even medical conditions, depression, things like that are so tied to it that I think if we could talk about it a little more, we would actually find more like holistic living. So women that have low desire and think it's normal. I do have a burden for men when they are talked about this way. And so I think it hurts men. They almost feel like their sexual desire is almost like demonized. Like it's almost like wicked, like it's the inevitable desire that causes them to be aggressive, to want something their wife doesn't want. It sets them up to be the bad guy. And I know somebody that says, I tell guys to tell their girlfriends, I'm going to protect you from my sexuality. And I'm like, wait, your sexuality is good.
Yeah.
You should not protect anyone from your sexuality. Your sexuality is such a beautiful thing. Definitely you need to protect your girlfriend. You need to keep yourself. But your sexuality is going to be a beautiful, thriving thing after you're married. And it can be before you're married too. So it's not like this evil, dark side. So I really feel sad about the way men's sexuality is talked about. I think we can almost frame women as spiritual or emotional and guys as sexual or physical. And so they almost feel some shame about that part of their lives. And so I think we're hurting men with that. The other men I believe that we're hurting is the men who don't even really understand the depth and breadth of women's sexual desire, that it can be there. And also actually especially in places where there has been female genital mutilation, FGM. So you get like Somalia, Kenya, some of the African countries and stuff where FGM happens regularly, that those men actually cannot bring their wives to pleasure. And so it's so interesting because FGM is done so that women will have sex out of duty to prove that they love their husband enough to take care of the husband's needs and not provide for their own needs. So it's interesting. That would be one of the reasons why they do it. And so I've talked to a friend that works with a lot of women that have experienced this, and also some of the men in the church. And she said the men have so much futility. Sex is so much about mutuality that when that is done to their wife as a little girl, that sex becomes very futile. So I think that's interesting for us to know in Anabaptist and evangelical culture, is that if that's what we believe sex is, it actually is going to become something it was never designed to be and not be the beautiful experience that God wanted it to be. The other people I think it hurts are men with low desire. So if they have low desire, which would be okay, they actually feel worse and worse about themselves. And so a perfectly functioning marriage with a woman with higher desire than man is going to work okay, unless they believe something's wrong with them because they have that. You do have all the medical conditions on the man's side that can interfere with their desire. So understanding that also, it's helpful, and the stereotypes hurt that kind of understanding. And then the seventh group is men and women who actually get confused over their gender because of the stereotypes. I've always struggled with this since I was married, but all of a sudden realizing in later years that this is some of the actual cause why the transgender issues we have right now is that the stereotypes have created that, like, I think I am a man. I've got to be.
You have desire.
Yeah. And all of the stereotypes have been so hurtful. I mean, if you like pink, if you better be a girl. If you like to climb trees, or if you have leadership giftings, or if you are a brainy person, you better be a guy, And then once again, in the desires category, it's like, that's where you decide, am I a lesbian? Am I gay? Am I bisexual? All these questions have to do with desire, and we've stereotyped them so much that it's not just about yourself or your spouse. It's what is said about me or the kind of person I am. And I have good friends that, one of them was sitting in church and a man was confessing a sexual addiction. And, she's sitting on the women's side of the church and looks over and starts thinking like, every sexual confession I hear is from that side of the church. What's wrong with me? Because I'm struggling. I'm the wrong gender. God made me wrong. Or maybe I'm a lesbian, all these questions because I don't fit the stereotypical sexual desire. So I believe that teaching, as much as it's maybe, I wonder who it helps, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think it does do a lot of harm. I've kind of, I might have made some blunders in being too brave and bold about it in conversation. I try to be a little kinder now because it does help some people. But I think that it's hurting people that aren't brave enough to speak up.
Yeah, it's not just like one group of women or one group of men. A lot of men and a lot of women aren't given space for and room at the table or the discussion because it's just not seen as normal or what's expected, and then they don't have freedom to speak openly about those things. Sometimes these discussions lead me to just be like, are there any good books out there? Like, it seems like all of them looking back, they're like this and that. But I don't know. I don't think that I have the answer for that. But yeah, it is good to recognize what things haven't been good about what we've been taught or read or, yeah.
And I think some of it's just absorbed. And, there's a lot of funny jokes out there about, stereotypes. That's actually what makes a joke funny sometimes. And just maybe if we're not brave enough to have honest conversations is when a joke gets, maybe taken too far or where we don't actually say, yeah, somebody that doesn't fit into that.
Yeah. I'll for one say that, like, I have lusted before in the past, and not that never happens anymore, but it, like, struck me one time specifically. I was just like, that's lust. Like, it, like, took a while for me to, like, recognize that in myself. I think just not being expected. And then I was like, oh, wow, this is a little bit of an issue for me. And I had this, like, thing where I think it didn't occur to me that, like, that was happening sometimes because it didn't happen for me with, like, people who I never thought that I would marry. For a lot of my life, I didn't think that there were many options around me of who would, like, be potential life partner, marriage partner. And so then I didn't, like, dwell on that very much. But then when I did interact with more people who were, like,
attractive to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Attracted to me. I was like, oh, wow, this is something that I see in myself. It took me a little bit to, like, I think, recognize that in myself.
And I think that it is often because we frame lust in, like, visual. Like, so that's why we say, well, men struggle more than women. They're more visual oriented, which I would love to know if that's true.
Yeah.
Once again, are women honest? Or I don't know how you get into, like, the actual heart of people, right? To, like, have people be honest and actually say what they're wrestling with. But yeah, lust can be, I think we've kind of said, like, men lust and it's more visual, physical, and then women struggle with, like, attachment. They tend to attach emotionally to people, and that can be dangerous. But what I've found so fascinating as I get to know more people, humans, men and women, that struggle with sexual attraction. And I know lust is such a kind of a broad term, and I love Jay Stringer's book called Unwanted, which is unwanted sexual behavior. That's been helpful for me. Unwanted sexual behavior, a kind of a term rather than always lust, because I think often we frame lust as in, like, visual attraction to people where it goes too far. But as I've talked to more people that have these struggles, I've realized that we're all kind of struggling with similar things rather than men are looking too much and women are attaching too much. It's a lot of our, maybe it's loneliness, maybe it is stress or anxiety or lack of nurture, lack of belonging. So men's groups tend to focus on, like, accountability, like, did you look this week? Did you, those kinds of things. But have you ever heard of a dry drunk? Dry drunk syndrome? Dry drunk syndrome is somebody who, like, stops drinking. They reach sobriety, but they actually have no recovery, like why they became a drunk. So they maybe stop drinking alcohol, but they probably are going to pick up some other kind of addiction because they still are very unhealed. So I think that's something that I've noticed in men's accountability groups. If they are trying to stop looking or stop acting out, the healing is actually like all this attachment stuff and like loneliness and actually understanding the love of God and the love of the community, like good, healthy love and what good friendship is. And so it sounds like all these girl issues, right? Like emotional issues. But a lot of the stuff driving the physical, sexual issues are actually emotional, spiritual issues. And so if we kind of separate them too much and say, this is a man's problem, this is a woman's problem, neither gets healing. Because you find women that are trying to do better, but never reaching like sexual desire. And then men that are trying to find healing, but never get to emotional connection. And so like, how can we actually be working towards the same thing? Bodies that are alive and sexual, but healed hearts. So we're not striving after the wrong thing, you know?
Yeah. Wholeness.
Yeah. Wholeness, like
everybody.
Integrating it. And yeah, so that's my huge desire, is to see healing on both sides. And I don't think we'll find as much segregated teaching then in that.
Yeah. Because the goal is the same for both.
Yeah.
One thing that I really would like for women to hear, as I would love for the healing and the wholeness and all that. But two, if you are a woman who is struggling with something, whether that be pornography, masturbation, lust, whatever it is, I wish that you wouldn't be fearful of coming to somebody with that. But I recognize too, though, that it might not be easy to do that. And there might be some judgment because, as we know, we've kind of been ingrained to have that intuitively. But I would hope that our communities can continue to work towards growth and that there is a safe space or a safe person that you can come to and be like, hey, this is what I'm struggling with, and work towards that healing and wholeness, and not just hide away in the shame and think that something's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with naming that desire and desiring growth and healing in that.
Yeah. And I think our stories have so much. I mean, our stories reveal so much about, of course, what we've gone through, but I think even our sexual desires, the actual erotic desires, which we're so scared about talking about, I think they actually tell the story of our life. And so if we're willing to talk about those, we can start pulling out all of these nuances that maybe need more healing. Because honestly, like for my story, it's not the sexual violation that has haunted me so much. It's the lies I believed around it. So those lies are going to show up in all kinds of different places, not just around sex. It's going to show up in trusting people. It's going to show up in, going to church with men and or women that say this or that, or it shows up all the time. And so to be able to tell our stories that, we kind of tend to shame and hide, those are actually, I think Satan knows well where to hide the things that actually will bring us healing. So yeah, for the women who have things that they're struggling with, to be brave, find maybe not a big accountability, not a big Sunday school or something to share, it just scares people, but find one or two to be honest with, and don't expect the person you're telling to have the answers though. Just say something like, would you be willing to walk with me and learn about this? Because I think a lot of us are willing to be the safe space if we don't have to have the answers, but if we're like, I'm willing to walk with you. I'm willing to learn anything. And if that's your experience, that's a true experience that I want to care for.
It's been so good to talk about all these things. And it's been really good. At the end of every episode that I have a list of fun questions that I would like to ask people. And the first one is, what is one thing that you do that gives you life?
Yes. Well, one thing I've discovered just recently is that I love refinishing furniture. I've been moving a lot and every place I move, and they've been very different kinds of houses, I've needed to refinish furniture. And so I am really enjoying that. And I don't know how to strip wood, but I know how to paint wood. But I've been doing some varnishing and staining. And so, yeah, that's something that I realized the other week when I was doing it. I was like, oh, I keep smiling and being like, this is so fun. So yeah, that brings me a lot of life.
Yeah. And the next question is, what is one hot take or unpopular opinion I give you the freedom to do, as controversial or as harmless as you'd like as a no? People can get opinionated. But.
Yes. Well, I have friends on many different sides. So, opinions, depends where you say them, if it's safe to say them. But something that I think is very broadly unpopular is the integration of men and women talking about sexuality. So they tend to always segregate when you talk about sexuality. And I think that's actually done harm, because I think we're mostly all struggling with the same thing. And especially as we enter more of an age where transgender and same-sex attraction is a thing, and people are going to be confessing it. What are we going to do with that confession? Is it still safe in that group? Well, if it's an all women's group and it's a woman that's attracted to women, is that still a safe place for her? So, we need to actually broaden our horizon, thinking about healing, that we're all looking for the same thing. And maybe this is going to be, I don't know. It goes along with our topic, but that's something I don't know if it's been tried. So honestly, maybe I need to talk to somebody who's tried it and see how it worked. Yeah. But I have some mother-son relationships where I've helped men work through some of these things. Always more like son age. And I very much felt a calling to be a mother in some of these settings. And as keeping it safe. But I don't know. I just wonder if it would be more helpful to see each other not so untouchable and unreachable and like so strange and mystical, if we would actually like understand each other. So probably unpopular.
Yeah. Try it out sometimes. See what you find out. Let me know. Yeah. Then, thirdly, what is one thing that you love?
Okay. Well, you said thing, so I can't say my grandson. So I thought about, I love Bible Hub. So I don't know if you've ever seen it or tried it out, but all the Greek words, Hebrew words. And so I actually love that when I'm studying the Bible. I teach Sunday school to junior youth, and we're getting into like word studies, and so like showing them Bible Hub, and I could go on there for hours. So that's something I really enjoy.
Yeah, that's great. And lastly, what is something that has been inspirational or educational to you recently? Kind of very broadly, book, podcast, whatever.
Yeah. So Bible Project, I absolutely love that. It's got articles, videos, podcasts, and I've just been like really falling in love with the Bible more and more with reading that, and just realizing how much good news the Bible has for us, and falling in love with Jesus and God through that. And I just, it's so rich and it's deeper than, I think I can get trapped in like, talking about trauma, or like you listen to all the podcasts about trauma or sexuality or something, and you go to the Bible Project and it's like, just like, it's like the water of life, honestly.
Yeah,
hopeful. And the Bible just has every topic that you've ever wanted to think about. And it's just, they do a great job explaining it and stuff. So
yeah, I've enjoyed some of those videos over the years, and it's a really good thing. Well, I think that brings us to the end of everything we were hoping to cover. So thanks so much for coming and sharing.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a lot of fun talking.
I feel like everyone is a guinea pig on this first season of this podcast that I'm getting into, so I'm grateful for everyone who's given their time and kind of come into this unknown space of what is this and what does this going to look like. So thank you so much. And as always, love God, love people, and seek his kingdom first.